I meet my real estate agent out here on Coyote Pass because it's just come to the point where the family's not going to live here. I'm positive that Janelle's not going to move out here. I finally told Robyn that I really can't stand the idea of living here, or at least at this point.
Look closely at that strip of desert. The blank dirt road, the wind writhing through half-finished dreams. That is Coyote Pass, where the promise of forever once lived. Now a reminder of what happens when forever loses its patience. This is the story of life after Coyote Pass. Before we get started, take a second, breathe. Because what you are fixin' to hear ain't no gossip reel. It is a reckoning. It is how the dream of one family became four worlds. Now imagine the land once more. Four parts sketched out in the dirt, each for a wife, each for a house. But money was scarce, tempers grew shorter, and love. Well, love became math. The network presented you with the edits, the tears, the walkouts, the talking heads. They did not present you with the quiet nights after the cameras departed, the calls that went unanswered, the texts that trailed off mid-sentence. That is where this story begins. Coyote Pass is silent now. The fences hum in the wind, but scattered miles apart. The women who once shared that dream are writing new chapters on their own paper in their own ink. We'll take this story piece by piece, what each one lost, what each one built, and the secret that ties them all back to that patch of Arizona dust. Stay with me, because each part will pull a new thread. And by the end, every thread will form a map of where they all went, and what they learned when the house they shared was only an idea. In a few minutes, you'll hear about the one visit that never happened, the knock that stopped echoing, and how that silence became the point of no return. Ready? Let's pass beyond the gates of Coyote Pass and see what life is like after the dream. The air in Flagstaff that morning was crisp and thin, the sort that makes even the hardiest of things seem delicate. A truck came down the gravel road, tires crunching like distant thunder. Inside was one of the women, call her the realist. She wasn't there to fight. She wasn't even there to negotiate. She was there to attempt one more time. For weeks, she'd been requesting a talk. Not money, not land. Time, a reminder that family was more important than anything else. But by the time she arrived at the house at the end of the street, the curtains were closed. The porch light wasn't lit. She knocked once. Then again, and once again. The ensuing silence was greater than any fight they'd ever had. Later that evening, she texted 3 messages. Brief, honest, unfiltered. I don't want to fight. Just talk to me. If this is goodbye, say it. None were replied to. And that was it. That was when the family officially split into before and after. They believe it occurred in front of the camera, that some soap opera moment concluded it. But it did not. It concluded there, at that black door in Flagstaff, when someone concluded that silence was less painful than the truth. Ask yourself this. Is it more painful to have been betrayed, or to know the person who betrayed you does not even care enough to tell you why? That unanswered knock would echo through everything that came next, because from that day on, each woman walked her own road, not away from the family, but toward herself. In the next part, we'll step onto the first of those roads, the one paved with determination, spreadsheets, and steel resolve. The one that taught survival in its purest form. Stay near, because what she constructed from scratch will make you think twice about what starting over is all about. When the dust settled after Coyote Pass, one woman didn't collapse, she calculated. She opened her laptop, stared at the empty screen, and whispered to herself, "Okay, let's start from zero." That woman was the builder. The one who always believed that hard work could fix anything, until hard work was all she had left. She'd been promised land, a foundation, a future that would grow brick by brick alongside love. But love can't pour concrete, so she did it herself. At dawn, she was driving between job sites and rental lots. At noon, she was talking to contractors. At night, she was sorting through receipts that told the real story, a family's fortune spent on dreams that weren't hers. Her friends said she was running on fumes. They were wrong. She was running on fire. Every choice became survival math. Sell the RV. Not yet. It's still shelter. Fix the credit, one bill at a time. Believe in someone again, maybe later. Every setback was a blueprint. Every scar was a reminder. And when people asked how she was holding up, she didn't say fine. She said, I'm building. because buried deep in her notebooks was a single page titled The Real House, not a metaphor, a real floor plan. Measurements, costs, and a final note scrawled in pen. When I move in, I won't owe anyone a thing. We'll come back to that note later, because when she finally builds it, it becomes the most poetic act of independence this family has ever seen. But before that happens, someone else miles away was learning a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of work, but the freedom of letting go. And her story starts not with a hammer, but with a laugh. When she left, she didn't pack much, just a suitcase, a few kitchen things, and something invisible peace. The healer didn't storm out. She walked away softly, like someone closing a book that's already been read too many times. She'd spent years trying to make chaos look like calm, years smiling through heartbreak. But one day, she woke up and realized her silence wasn't noble. It was costly. She moved to a place where the air was different, lighter, kinder. A place where laughter didn't need permission, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a guest in her own story. She started cooking again, not because it was expected, but because it made her happy. She started dancing in her kitchen, barefoot, to songs that weren't about loss, but about life. Neighbors said she glowed differently. Friends said her smile finally looked real, and somewhere between coffee and quiet, she remembered what her own voice sounded like. She wasn't rebuilding like the builder. She wasn't seeking control. She was healing. She forgave, but she didn't forget. Forgiveness, for her, wasn't about them. It was about peace. Retention booster, emotional depth plus open loop. But one night, sitting on her porch under the Utah stars, she got a call, a familiar voice, one that once made her heart skip, now made it ache. He said 5 words that froze her. You were right about everything. What did that mean? Was it regret? An apology? A setup? We'll get there because that call, and what she did next, would spark a ripple that reached every corner of the family. But before we get to that, there's someone else we need to check on. Someone who was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through her hands. She wasn't rebuilding, she wasn't healing, she was waiting, and she didn't even know what for. The dreamer lived in between, not fully gone, not fully staying, just hovering. Her mornings started with routine, coffee in a silent kitchen, scrolling through memories that the internet never lets fade. Every headline, every photo, every fan theory reminding her of what once was. She'd spent years believing that loyalty could fix distance, that patience could turn absence into love. But time doesn't heal what's never been tended to. Still, she waited. She told herself it was strength. Maybe it was. But deep down, even she knew. Sometimes waiting isn't faith. It's fear dressed up as hope. She started to build something new, though quietly, a business, a brand, a reinvention that felt safer than affection. Each day she spoke to strangers with more warmth than she'd received at home in years. They called her strong. They called her inspiring, but when the camera lights went off, the smile slipped. There were nights she'd walk through her new space, touch the walls, and whisper to herself, "This is mine, just mine." It was empowerment, yes, but also grief, the kind of grief that never screams. It just hums in the background day after day, until one day you forget what silence sounds like without it. And in that silence, a truth began to grow. The life she'd been waiting for wasn't coming back. But what she didn't know was that while she was rebuilding her image, a letter was being drafted, one that would change how the world saw everything that happened on that dusty land called Coyote Pass, a letter with her name in it, not in ink, in evidence. Who wrote it? And what did it expose? Stay right here because in the next part, we step into the most secret chapter of all, the one written not in public posts, but in legal documents. Every story leaves breadcrumbs, receipts, transfers, tiny clues hiding in plain sight. This one started with a bank statement, a few odd payments that didn't make sense. A familiar name, a familiar date, a sum that didn't match the story told on television. At first, no one noticed, or maybe no one wanted to, but one of the women did, the realist. The builder, she'd been through every file, every log in every shared expense, and then she saw it, a pattern every 2 weeks, like clockwork, money leaving one account, landing in another, a private account, a company name she'd never heard before. That discovery opened a door that was supposed to stay closed. An LLC, a slush fund, a hidden trail that told the truth in numbers where words had failed. The paper trail didn't just show where the money went, it showed who mattered most, at least to the ones writing the checks. Invoices labeled childcare, consulting, miscellaneous. But when she cross-referenced the dates, the pattern was undeniable. Every time the family couldn't afford something, there was a payout somewhere else. And the kicker, those payments didn't just keep someone comfortable, they kept someone quiet. That's when whispers began, not just in forums or headlines, in courtrooms. Lawyers started asking questions, receipts turned into exhibits. One by one, the stories stopped being family drama and became testimony, but what no one expected was who came forward next. Not a wife, not a child, someone who'd been there every day, seeing everything, an insider. The one person who knew what really went on behind those closed doors. Her name would shake the story to its core, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't just the money that was on trial, it was the truth itself. The courtroom was silent, except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of anticipation. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the tension didn't need a lens to be felt. For years, this family had lived their drama in front of millions, but this was different. This was real stakes, real money, real truth. When the verdict finally came down, it wasn't fireworks. It was thunder rolling, slow and heavy across the desert. Every count, every accusation, every dollar accounted for, and for once, there were no maybes, no what-ifs, no clever edits. Just judgment. The room froze as the words hit like a hammer. Liable, guilty, accountable. Across the aisle, two of the women didn't cheer. They didn't gloat. They just exhaled, as if years of weight finally slid off their shoulders. The others sat still, faces unreadable, caught somewhere between disbelief and damage control. It was over, but endings don't come clean. They come with paperwork, property divisions, and a lifetime of "I told you so" moments whispered in the dark. The story that started with promises in the desert had turned into a legal storm that buried those promises in dust. But this isn't where it ends. Because after the verdict, after the shock, comes the question nobody dared to ask: what does freedom look like when you've spent half your life fighting for it? And more importantly, can freedom ever feel peaceful when it's built from the ashes of betrayal? The answer lies not in the courtroom, but in what came next, in the quiet moments after the chaos. Moments where each woman faced the mirror and asked, now that the truth is out, who am I without the story? In the next part, we'll see how each of them answered that question. Not with words, but with choices. After the verdict, something strange happened. The world moved on, but they didn't. For years, they'd all been defined by the same last name, the same storyline, the same endless reruns of what went wrong. But when the dust of the courtroom settled, a new kind of silence arrived. Not the silence of avoidance, the silence of reset. The builder got up early the next morning and did what she'd always done: work. But this time, it wasn't to prove a point, it was to build something hers. The foundation was poured on land no one could take from her. Each wall stood taller than her doubts. Each nail was a heartbeat saying, "You did it." The healer didn't rush. She spent mornings in sunlight, answering messages from women who said, "You made me brave." She smiled every time because she finally understood surviving wasn't weakness, it was witness. The dreamer started saying yes again, to travel, to guests, to change. Her project grew, her laughter returned, and she learned that independence doesn't mean isolation, it means finally belonging to yourself. Even the quiet one, the one who stayed behind closed doors, began to feel the cracks of self-reflection spreading through the walls she built. Some call it guilt. Some call it grace trying to get in. Either way, even silence has to face its own echo. Eventually, they were no longer co-stars in a shared script. They were authors now, each one writing her own story without asking for permission. But before we close their chapters, there's one last twist. A year after the trial, one of them returned to the desert, not to rebuild, not to reclaim, but to bury something for good. And what she buried that day wasn't just a memory. It was the final symbol of everything that once held her down. Stay with me, because in the final part, we go back to where it all began, to Coyote Pass, and end where the story truly finds peace. The desert doesn't forget. It holds everything: the echoes, the laughter, the broken promises. And now it was time to return. The sun was lower than before, painting the sky in bruised gold. The wind still carried the smell of dust and memory. Only this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was honest. She parked at the edge of Coyote Pass, the land that once held a dream big enough for five. Now it was just her, the open sky, and a folded piece of paper in her hand. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a verdict. It was a note. One she'd written to herself years ago, when she still believed love was something you earned through endurance. She knelt, dug into the dry earth, and placed it inside. No ceremony, no goodbye, just release. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from finally stopping the need to explain yourself. As she stood, she looked around one last time: the fence posts, the dust trails, the horizon stretching farther than any fight could reach. She smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. They had all moved on, in their own ways, some rebuilt, some repented, some simply rested. The story that started with shared land ended with separate paths, not as tragedy, but as truth. Because life after Coyote Pass wasn't about what was lost. It was about what was found: self-respect, peace, and the courage to live a life unfilmed, unfiltered, and undeniably real. She turned toward her car, the wind picking up behind her. And as the camera of the mind pulls back, the last image we see isn't a family divided. It's a woman walking forward into her own sunset. Because maybe that's the real ending we've all been waiting for. Not revenge, not redemption, but release. The story of Coyote Pass wasn't just about who stayed or who left. It was about what it takes to finally set yourself free, and that is the truth that no network could ever script.